Good afternoon, everyone. So this brings us to the last talk at Summit for 2012, but I'd like to introduce Sarah Day. She's a Bay Area native, but now lives in Southern California. And just a fun fact, she, in her spare time, enjoys doing 16th century Italian rapier fencing. Hope I said that right. Yeah? So, Sarah.
Thank you. Excellent. All right. Hi. I would like to congratulate the, I think, 23 of you who had the chutzpah to hang out until the end of the day. That's super awesome. I know this is the last talk. Yes, especially you, sir. Everybody's ready to go home. I appreciate you staying. This will probably go a little bit short, especially since I'm totally nervous, and we'll probably talk like a hummingbird on crystal meth the whole time. So, I have a clicker, which goes, and doesn't work. We'll use the thingy. Excellent. All right. Hi. How's it going? My name, as previously stated, was Sarah. Is Sarah still. What Matt didn't mention was the strong interest I have in my cat, which I also put in my bio. I don't know why that didn't get referenced, but that was important. So anyway, I'm a technical writer. I have been working at QAD for about 3 years now, so since 2009. And I do a lot of things, but one of my favorite things to do is act as an administrator on our installation of Confluence. A little background about QAD and what we do. We are an ERP company. We make software which manages large-scale manufacturing and accounting and finance practices. We handle both smaller local organizations, national organizations, and global organizations, so we really run the gamut from tiny little businesses to great big huge companies. We have customers in over 90 countries. We have customers in every time zone on the planet, and if you ask Chile, which thinks they own part of Antarctica, we have customers in every continent as well. If you ask everybody else, it's just everywhere but Antarctica. So we release our software 3 times a year. We release documentation, training, and software updates sporadically in between those, but we try to make it concurrent with the release cycle. So we're basically always running and we're always working in quarterly or 6-weekly increments. Our I-19 project, as we call it, is our endeavor to keep abreast of our customers' needs without doing more work than we absolutely have to. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about how Atlassian tools, and specifically Confluence and a couple of our favorite plugins, took our I-19 project from very disorganized and chaotic to fairly streamlined and much less painful than it was before. So first, I'm going to discuss the history of the I-19 project, what we were doing wrong, and what we've changed. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of transitioning our users from multiple content management systems into Confluence. I'm going to talk about our endeavors to keep our Confluence instance as user-friendly and approachable for new users as possible. And I'm going to talk a little bit about managerial oversight, making sure that the people with C in front of their name are happy. And I'm going to talk about what we think is coming up for us in the future with our installation of Confluence. So first of all, our I-19 project, which is way easier to say than internationalization, was introduced to generalize our production requests and try and help us meet our customers' needs as quickly and accurately as possible while not making us do too much extra work. We basically started taking a large-scale look at all of the requests that we were getting and trying to make sweeping changes to our entire product rather than individual changes by customer or by individual countries' needs. When you do international accounting, there are lots of countries that have very specific finite needs. I don't know if anybody else has worked in international accounting, but sort of the black sheep of the family is always Italy or Brazil. Brazil is always messing with us, doing weird new accounting things. So we tried to look at requests we were getting from special needs countries, we'll say, and make them more general to the point where we could apply them to other countries as well should the need arise. So unintentionally, our I-19 project also gave us sort of a close-up and fresh look at how many different kinds of challenges you can face when you're working internationally with international teams on international needs. So when your team members are in different time zones, or they speak different languages, or they have different work histories or work backgrounds and different educational backgrounds, you can have a lot of misunderstandings and lost opportunities that you don't even think, because you have different assumptions, you don't even think might come up later. there's a lot of miscommunication and there's a lot of difficulty catching up, especially with the whole time difference thing. You can't really replicate face-to-face communication, even with things like video chatting, even with things like Twitter and push-to-talk and all that good stuff. Being able to walk into your coworker's office and say, hey, I just had this idea, is it dumb? Or, hey, I responded to that email and you didn't say anything, did you see it? Can't be reproduced. It's a need that can't be met when your country or when your customers and your coworkers are in other continents. So let's talk a little bit about the I-19 project before Confluence came along. What you see here is the Developer Center, which is basically a team page that we set up on our instance of Confluence for the internationalization team. We'll talk more about the Developer Centers specifically in a minute, but what I want to call your attention to is some of the pictures here. You see here we have our product manager, our mentor, the director of release management, program manager, and our support liaisons. These people are in our corporate office in Santa Barbara, they're in Brazil, and they're in Poland, and they work with people in countries all over the world. Just this one little screenshot is it's a case study in potential miscommunication. We have at least 3 different languages, 3 different time zones, and 3 different work backgrounds all at the same time. So, since the goals of the I-19 project were to generalize our production requirements and to also make developing new product easier in the future, we sort of had to look at our content management system and try to apply the same philosophy to that. Look at how specific it was and how it was failing us, and make it more general and more easy to approach for more of our employees. We really wanted to facilitate a quick, effective, efficient use for everybody, from the entry-level, like little intern who just needs to code a wiki page and submit a request, to the developer who has another 50 things to do today and could care less, right? So, from a big picture, what was going wrong with our I-19 project was that our production requirements and requests were being maintained poorly. We used Excel spreadsheets, which were difficult to search, but always had to be searched for new ideas. And they had to be updated all the time, and often had to be searched through and updated before we could make advancements or even submit new requests for development. We were using Lotus Notes databases, and I don't know, has anybody else used a Lotus Note database to manage Yeah, I see those looks on your faces, exactly. They're difficult to search, there are rampant permissions issues, and because we actually were using cloned versions of the same database for multiple countries, we would run into an issue where, like, say, in the corporate office, I would submit something to the database, ask my coworker in China, did you see the thing I just updated? And she would say, no, of course I haven't, because her database hadn't been cloned yet. It would get cloned overnight. So there was this mandatory time delay that was really tedious. And, of course, we were using email, like everybody does, but email, doesn't have automatic notifications. It's easy to unsubscribe from, it's easy to miss something in a paragraph, and it's easy to ignore. So our problem was that our inconsistent information management was really holding us back. We had redundancies, we had missed opportunities. The documents that we needed to maintain our product and to submit new requests were difficult to find. The work requirements, because they were being stored at least one of 3 different ways, were often missed or misplaced or just misunderstood completely. And because of these redundancies in the system, where we would have multiple instances of the same request floating around, one in an Excel spreadsheet, one in an email thread, and one in a Lotus Notes database, all of which were slightly different all the time, some of the work that we needed to do one time was done 2 or 3 times, or was done for one country when it needed to be done for 6. And that just kneecapped us. It was crippling. So, after some discussion, we discovered Confluence. Right? So, Confluence really gave our R&D department a home base for development. Right now, what we're doing is we have Confluence rolled out exclusively to R&D. It's a private environment, so it's not public. Obviously, it's in-house only. We call it QDN, which is the QAD Developers Network. And it's really given us a clean slate to start development from. One of the first things we did, if you remember that screenshot I showed you of the Internationalization team's developer center, was we set up that kind of center for every team in R&D. So if you look here, you see the content and training development team's developer center, which this is a team that I'm a member of. I'm actually up there next to the guy with the dog. So these are really useful because they allow us to keep up to date on what our own team is doing. They source a lot of the links that we use frequently, and they allow other teams to go in and look at what we're doing or look at where we are in our process and sort of inform themselves rather than having to ask us questions and wait for a response. We can do this for the other teams too, obviously. This is just a screenshot of mine. So what we're doing here, those of you like savvy Confluence users, is we're using the card deck macro. We're sourcing from individual pages, and we're drawing information like from JIRA plugins, comments on our web publishing software. We have some version control information. We have the status of our test environments, and it's stuff that's mostly useful for CTD employees, but just in case somebody else needs to know it, it's there and it's available, and that's really awesome. So we set something like this up for the I-19 project, but it wasn't quite enough. This is a very passive information presentation format. It's very much go in and look, discover information, and leave, and use it somewhere else. What the I-19 group needed was a way to streamline their whole production process. So instead of just giving them an internationalization space or a developer center, we gave them a space, their very own space. What happened was they approached us, they approached the QDN team and said, look, we would like to do this with our process and our content management. Can it be done? And we sort of stepped back and thought about it and said, yeah, I think it can be done. So I know a lot of you are Confluence users. Who has set up a space before? Who knows what a space is? Put your hands up. Excellent, fabulous. So those of you who don't, a space is basically a mini wiki within the larger wiki structure of Confluence. It's an area where ideas can be grouped thematically or by content, and where you can apply certain plugins that aren't necessarily applied to the rest of your Confluence instance. So the I-19 space has allowed us to integrate our JIRA plugin. It's allowed us to do some really cool workflow management, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and really just sort of manage our information and our content presentation from the top down. So we're not playing catch up trying to find things anymore. We know where everything is, and we just try to pump it out to the users as needed. So this is our I-19 space landing page. It looks a lot like the front page of, well, our main Confluence instance, QDN. But you can see there's sort of some familiar stuff here. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But first, user friendliness was one of the highest priorities that we looked at when we were setting up this space. We really wanted an effective and a streamlined content management system, and that doesn't work when your user base doesn't understand it. We also had a bunch of team members coming over who had never used Confluence before, and there was a little bit of pushback from the users about migrating to yet another content management system. There was feedback that was like, we've already used Vignette, we've already used Share, we've already used all of these other things, and do we have to learn one more thing, was sort of the unifying cry, to which we said, yes, and you're going to thank us. So here's the landing page of the space again. The information that we've collected here, we tried to make sort of globally useful, both to advanced users and to newer users. We've got team contacts, project and country information, information on Q80 offices around the world, and release readiness status panel, which I'm going to show you in just a second. So let's see, we tried to use simple language. If anyone is familiar with simple.wikipedia.org, it's one of my favorite little websites. Basically the idea of conveying ideas as non-jargonally as possible in the simple words, short sentences, something that it's easy to understand regardless of not only your reading level, but your language of origin, right? So, yeah, we use simple language, and we included documentation, like introductory documentation for our I-19 process. So if anybody found their way to the space, they could familiarize themselves with the product or the project rather than having to ask someone else about it. So right here, you see our internationalization contacts page. This is actually just a collection. You click on it, and you get a list of pages which are associated with the labels for each country, as well as country contacts and affiliated employees in each country. Here you have the criteria for starting a new internationalization request. If you think that you have a feature that could be globalized or internationalized, you have to go through this process before you can start a workflow for it. This looks like a daunting list of things to do, and it is a little intimidating, but really the only thing you need to read is step 1, which is the step that tells you the mandatory criteria for starting a new request. If something on step 1 is not being met, go somewhere else because you're not ready for the I-19 process yet. Item 2 addresses items that might be associated with your project which would actually disqualify it for internationalization. And item 3, assuming that you've met all the criteria for item 1, item 3 addresses the actions you need to take as a user before you can start a production request. So the release readiness panel, which I just mentioned to you, is a way of integrating some of that country information by release into our I-19 information. It's a sort of a simple way for new and experienced users to understand the status of a release just by looking at it. Like I said, we have the software releases 3 times a year. Here they're categorized by country. You can see alphabetically we have a list of the countries that we use for our internationalization project. Countries that are listed in orange don't have any internationalization needs for the particular release at the time. Countries listed in light green have needs which are in the process of being met. Basically, the projects are ongoing, and then when the projects are finished, the country color is changed to dark green. This is a manual thing. Basically, we go in and update country by country as the projects go on. So basically, at a glance, you can go in and look at your look at the release readiness panel, and if it's mostly dark green, you're doing pretty good. But at the beginning of a release, it's mostly light green, and the idea is that it migrates towards darker the farther on the release goes. So, speaking of country stuff, another thing that we really tried to integrate for our users was information about the individual countries and customers that we service. You can see over on the left there, we've obviously got that list of country centers, which and the countries, again, are categorized by color. And we've got little pictures of the flags, which just sort of adds some color. Clicking anywhere in those will take you to the country centers, which are a little bit like the developer centers, but present some different information. Basically, we have a little bit of basic info about each country, such as their native language, their time zone, their currency. When you make accounting software, this stuff is really important. We imported some release readiness information country by country from JIRA. If you scroll down to this requirements and roadmap section, you can see here a list of tickets which are open and their status for that particular country, for that particular release. This is really useful if you're doing a lot of work for one specific country, like some of the documentation projects I do impact Brazil almost exclusively. I just have to go to the Brazil Center and it's okay. I don't have to go all the way through JIRA to try and find everything that applies to me. And then we've got this nifty little guy which tells us sort of our history successfully completing requirements for that particular country by release. And that's useful too. So we've also got information on the country centers about team contacts. You can see we've got key contacts. Those are a couple QAD employees, and if applicable, we also list contact information for partners like QAD customers who might have information or data for us. So I've skipped a couple, yeah. So that would sort of be the passive part of the I-19 space, the sort of self-guided information giving part of the I-19 space. The active part, the part where I think it starts to get really, really cool, is when you go in and you actually initiate a new request right from within the space. So what we did was we set up a workflow, and we used Kamala Tech's ad hoc workflow plugin. I don't know, has anybody used that? Yeah, I know you have. Has anybody? Nobody else has used the. Oh, okay, you guys, this is going to change you. So Kamala Tech, they're actually here. They had nifty little keychains. I recommend you go say hi. They make a plugin for Confluence which allows you to set up a template, assign tasks to that template, complete the tasks, and advance a process to completion. It's really easy to set up. It's been very easy for us to implement, and it's really changed the way that we have done a lot of our process management. So I'm going to walk you through the request process, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about the nitty-gritty sort of technical aspects of setting it up. So first thing you do is you start to create a new page, just like you would anywhere in a Confluence instance. You select a page template, which I'm sure many of you have done. Yes? Nod or shake. Excellent. Good. In the I-19 space, the only template page we have is the internationalization request form. In our main Confluence instance, we actually have a whole strip of different templates you can use. But yeah, so you go through, you initiate the workflow by saving the page, and it prompts you to fill in these variables. So it's things like you assign yourself to the workflow by putting in your 3-letter identifier. You pick which module, group, product, and version your enhancement request would apply to, and then you fill in a little bit of a business case about it just to inform people what you think this project is necessary for. After that, your request is saved as a draft. This label is automatically assigned based on some coding that we did, and it's actually, this is a really crucial part of the process too. So as you go through, you can complete tasks which are assigned to a draft form of the workflow, and that will advance it to the review status. So in terms of labels and in terms of this whole draft thing I'm talking about, when you save the page, it saves itself as a draft. And as you navigate through the workflow, it advances and different labels are assigned to it based on its status as a page. The labels themselves trigger categorization functions and also send emails to team members. So a manager or an admin level user like myself gets an email when there's a new page waiting for, or a new workflow request waiting for review or waiting for approval. So this is, you can find this area in the space admin section of your Confluence instance, and when you have the ad hoc workflow plugin installed, you get this little workflow tab down here, and this is what it looks like. You can see you've got different potential states for a workflow to be in at any given time. You've got draft, review, published, and obsolete, and then different actionable items, including creating an I-19 JIRA ticket, which is one of the tasks that you have to complete to advance through the draft status and into the review status, and then the basically publish approval, which transitions the workflow into a different state entirely. If you look a little bit, here's some of, this isn't the full code that we wrote. This is basically a nice friendly looking version of the code that we wrote. You can find the full code in the markup tab over there, but I'm not going to show it to you because it's long and scary. Basically what you see here is when you save the page for the first time, it sets itself as a draft. When the page state is set as draft, it adds the label draft to it and sets the person who has saved the page for the first time as the document author, and then adds a comment in that person's name. This is crucial. The comment says internationalization request is in draft. You know, it doesn't really say anything, but what it's doing is subscribing that person to all follow-up comments on that same request. And then when all of the tasks are complete for the draft, the page state changes to review, and another comment is added that says, internationalization request is being reviewed. This comment is then emailed to the original page author to let them know that their tasks are completed and they're waiting for a manager to approve. It also sends an email to, let's see, yes, it also sends an email to their manager saying, hey, can you approve this now because it's completed? There's no tedious going in and checking. There's no searching for the status of your own request. You basically start it, complete the tasks, and then get an email when it's all done. It's really awesome. So from a user perspective, the workflow pretty much runs itself. All you need to do is set it up, go back in and check off when you've done some tasks, and you get notification emails when things are done. So, let's see. Yes, this part, we worked really hard on making this easy for people who don't know much about Confluence to use. It's little check boxes and then you hit save. And we tried to make it really easy for people who are super busy because they have way too much on their plate to use as well. Little check boxes, you hit save. You know, even our developers who are always swamped with work have time to go through and complete this workflow. So in terms of implementation, the plugin itself was actually really, really easy to install. I mean, I recommend you go over and talk to the Kamala Tech guys about it. I'm not getting paid by them, I promise. I just really like their product. The process of writing code was pretty difficult. We had to sort of take a bigger picture view and look at the process and the logic behind some of the decision-making processes that we use. Sort of unpack all of that and then figure out, okay, if you're starting from ground zero, what base assumptions do you have? What are the steps of the process you're most likely to take? And, you know, that was an interesting thought experiment, but not Kamala Tech's fault. It was kind of our fault. We also ran into, as I said, a little bit of hesitation from the users. Even the Confluence users, the ones who are like, wait, we can interact with this, like we can do things with this, okay. And like, you know, we had really good adoption from our JIRA users because they were familiar with the whole workflow process. But the new Confluence users and the experienced Confluence users who were used to only having sort of information presented to them were a little confused by the process. But, you know, it all came around. So one of the questions we also encountered from sort of a higher level arena was the sort of the question of managerial oversight. Like if everyone can go in and start new requests and advance them sort of at their leisure, like how do we wade through the BS requests? How do we make sure that every request is not a waste of somebody's time? Basically, we actually have complete managerial supervision of the request process. It doesn't really look like it from the front because everything is so transparent. Any user can go in and look at any request and see sort of the status of it and how it's going. But the manager has the power to either sort of pull the trigger or drop the hammer and say either this is great, this is done, it's ready for approval, here we go, or no, this is terrible, go back to base one, or no, this needs more work, go back to base one. So here on the last stage of the workflow, you can see that the draft state has changed to review. You've got that tab of tasks, all of which have been completed, and we're in the last tab over here, which is publish approval. As an admin user, you're seeing what I see basically, which is the ability to approve or reject a workflow. Managers also have this as well. An entry-level user just has to wait for their workflow to be approved or rejected. I can also force publish or force advance pretty much any step in the workflow if I need to, as can other admin level or manager users. So it's fairly easy if something is pressing and someone is not updating their workflow, or a workflow has been started maybe inadvertently and should be canceled. The managers have the ability to do that. It gives them a lot of control, and it's a fairly low stress environment for newer users as well. I mean, sometimes mistakes are made, but it's generally not a big deal because none of this is set in stone. It's extremely flexible, and it's also extremely transparent, which we really, really like. So, it's sort of the cornerstone of our process. We like that. So, philosophically, I really feel like a transparent work environment facilitates collaboration. It really facilitates group work, and it facilitates an understanding of your coworkers' strengths and weaknesses. I understand it's a little bit scary for some people having this much of our process sort of open to public, well, not public, but open to view from other employees. But I think this is one of those things that really adds to a sense of camaraderie and teamwork and rapport that is otherwise really difficult to get when you're in an international environment. So we have a combination of flexibility and transparency and also rigid control that I think is key to intelligent teamwork and development. It's been really, really valuable, and we've learned a lot. So that's what's going on in the I-19 space. It's thriving, and so we're sort of looking around asking, okay, what happens now? We're thinking about rolling out spaces to all the teams in R&D, not just the I-19 team. We think it would be really awesome if we could get this plugin up and rolling for other people and start managing some processes for everyone. We're also looking at migrating all of our content, or all of our non-customer facing documentation content, to QDN, or to Confluence rather. Right now it's just R&D, and we've run into a couple sort of legal auditing issues about whether or not a wiki is an appropriate system for for some of our process documentation. That's sort of a work in progress and has been for a long time, but we really like Confluence, and we think it's sort of the ideal setup for our needs, which is probably why we're here, come to think of it. And we're also we're running a Confluence 3.5.2 right now. We want to roll out to 4 at some point next year, we hope. So in conclusion, which is the thing you're never supposed to say in a presentation I just did, we went from too many layers of management with the Excel spreadsheets, the Lotus Notes databases, and the email stuff to 2 layers of management, a passive viewable wiki and an active workflow process. We went from confused users who couldn't find anything and were upset and scared all the time to a universally transparent system where people can educate themselves about their needs. We went from tedious manual updating of spreadsheets and databases to workflows that self-advance and let you know when they're done. And redundancy and errors with missed work opportunities to a streamlined process that is very easy to watch from start to finish. So thank you, Atlassian, for making this wonderful product that we love so very, very much. And thank you all for staying for the whole, almost the whole 30 minutes. I really appreciate your listening, and I'm ready for questions if you have them.